All right. Hello again, adventures, and welcome to another exciting daily vlog. This is daily vlog number 294. And today, I want to talk about mage hunters. So, feeling a little bit better than during my last video. Mostly because I got to sit down and play some DDO, Dungeons and Dragons Online, and I just love playing that game. So I was watching a friend of mine stream Dragon Age 2, which got a lot of undue hate. And I was never particularly. I never had the issue that a lot of people did. Like, a lot of people didn't like that it was a city-based campaign, whereas Dragon Age Origins, you went all over Thedas, or Ferelden, I mean. And a lot of people didn't like the kind of very linear story that it told, because it was an act-type structure. I never had the issue with it that a lot of other people did. I liked the story in and of itself, and personally, the companions in Dragon Age 2 are some of my favorite companions. In particular, I love Fenris. I'm also a huge fan of Anders, but for completely different reasons. Anders, from a character perspective, is just an extremely interesting character story that I'm not going to spoil if you guys have never played Dragon Age 2 or you just don't know Anders' character arc. But Anders is an incredibly interesting character. Fenris, on the other hand, the kind of archetype that he represents, I think is really, really cool. And it's one of the better implementations of that style of character. Like, Fenris in and of themselves is basically a magic warrior. But the thing that makes Fenris unique is Fenris has these tattoos, effectively, but they're lyrium. And what it allows him to do is it allows him to phase through things. And one of his favorite things to do is to phase through a person, stop midway through, and then stop phasing and basically explode them. It's a weird thing. But he has this overwhelming hatred of mages, because mages are what turned him into this lyrium-infused assassin. And and part of the process that gave him these lyrium to the tattoos also wiped his memory, so he has no idea who he is. He was a slave before meeting before meeting Hawk, or the hero of Kirkwall, the main character of of Dragon Age 2, and so he has this extreme distrust of mages in general. Which, again, really interesting character. But it got me thinking about the idea of, like, a mage hunter character, because eventually what can happen, depending on the choices that you make, is Fenris can actually go off and just go around killing Tevinter's slavers and freeing slaves. And a lot of Tevinter, just people in Tevinter in general, are mages. Like, mages are a huge part of the Tevinter Imperium. And they apparently published some stories that focused on Fenris later on. And one of them, an ally of his, actually goes to get training as a mage hunter. And it got me thinking about kind of the idea of a mage hunter or a mage slayer, and just how incredibly awesome an idea that is. But when you look at how it's implemented in D&D 5th edition, which is, there is a single feat called Mage Slayer that is massively underwhelming, really isn't ever a good choice for a feat, though the 5.5 version is slightly better. We'll talk about that in a second. The idea of a mage hunter is very, very interesting in a world where magic is commonplace and where getting extremely powerful in magic makes you vastly more dangerous than being extremely skilled with weapons or something like that. The idea of a group of people developing skills and techniques specifically designed to circumvent the abilities that magic users use makes perfect sense. And the idea of a character that has kind of devoted their life to basically fighting David versus Goliath style encounters, because again, we've talked about this many, many times, the idea of the caster martial divide and how high level casters are always so incredibly powerful compared to the martial, the equivalent levels in a martial class. When we translate to that existing in the actual game, high level and even mid level wizards would be incredibly dangerous. And you would, it would make sense to have certain people that kind of specialize in that. In the same way that in the Star Wars universe, there were certain bounty hunters that actually not really specialized in hunting Jedi, but were particularly good at it, and especially during the Jedi Purge. I think some of them made some money of that, and a lot of that had to do with like Mandalorians in general tended to be really good facing Jedi for a number of reasons. Probably the biggest of which is the Mandalorians and the Jedi fought years previously in a war, and just the things that Mandalorians focus on as far as combat is concerned just tends to work really well against Jedi, which are space wizards. So yeah, I just got this idea of, well, how could we create a mage slayer in D&D 5th edition or in any system that actually feels like a mage slayer. And I think looking at the mage slayer feats in 5.0 and 5.5 will give us a good idea of what not to do. So let's first start off with the 5.0 version of the mage slayer. It's a feat, which that in and of itself means you have to start thinking of opportunity cost, because if you are going to be a mage slayer, theoretically you might be a wizard that specializes in killing other wizards, but the way that the particular feat is created, the description is you have practiced techniques useful in melee combat against spellcasters, gaining the following benefits. So this is specifically melee style characters that are going to be going up against mages. And then you basically start coming into the problem of opportunity cost. The things that we're going to talk about in just a second here are just nowhere near as useful as if you're going to be a melee character, great weapon fighter, defensive duelist, taking the I can't remember what it's called, the battle master feat that actually gives you access to maneuvers. All of those things are significantly more useful to a melee-based character than what we have here. And so what do we have? First, when a creature within 5 feet of you casts a spell, you can use your reaction to make a melee weapon attack against that creature. That in and of itself is actually pretty useful, or it sounds like it should be pretty useful, because it's giving you the ability not only to use your reaction, which is not something that you are guaranteed to be able to use, so gives you more actions, thus giving your side more actions, thus being beneficial. But in addition to that, it's going to let you make a melee weapon attack, and depending on the class that you choose for this, like if you're a fighter, especially something like a battle master for a fighter, like you are built for doing things off of weapon attacks. So that can be very, very useful to you. In practice, it's just not nearly as useful as you would think it is. There's things like Misty Step that means that they can get away from you without giving you an opportunity to attack. There are other things that they can do simply to get rid of you. And there's the problem that you have to actually get up to them. And most spellcasters worth their weight in peanuts will know, don't let the dude with the big sword anywhere near me. So as much as it sounds like it could be useful in practice, I really haven't seen it used very often, because 9 times out of 10, when a magic user has an enemy right next to them, their first thought is, I'm going to get away from this person so they can't continue hitting me. So it's interesting, but it does rely entirely on the enemy that you're attacking basically allowing you to do this. And that's kind of a theme with Mage Slayer in general. Second, when you damage a creature that's concentrating on a spell, that creature has disadvantage on the saving throw it makes to maintain its concentration. Again, another thing that should be kind of useful in the idea that giving them disadvantage on concentration checks is useful. Concentration spells are very, very powerful. Being able to get rid of them quickly is very, very useful. However, again, depending on the character that you're playing, most martials get their additional power by making multiple attacks, not by making stronger attacks. Like wizards and casters in general, higher level spells do actual more base damage. Whereas, especially when you're talking about something like the fighter, you do more damage by just getting extra attacks and getting more and more attacks. And so, while yes, having disadvantage on the saving throw is useful, when you look at the actual numbers, unless you are regularly doing anywhere between like 25 or 30 hit points of damage per attack, in general, it's going to be a DC 10, and they get to add their Constitution modifier to it, plus their proficiency bonus. So it's generally they're going to be rolling a minimum of like a +5 or +6. Higher level ones might have a +10 or something like that, meaning the only way that they fail is they roll a nat 1. Giving them disadvantage, even with disadvantage, they're probably going to make their saves, and the most effective thing to get them to not make the save is just keep making them make saves over and over again. So as much as, again, something should be useful, in practice it really isn't. And again, it relies entirely on the enemy to give you the ability to use it. Because if the enemy isn't using concentration spells, that is completely worthless. And then the final one, you have advantage on saving throws against spells cast by creatures within 5 feet of you. And again, this is another thing where it relies on the enemy to do something to allow you to do this ability. So the Mage Slayer feat is entirely reliant on the enemy for you to be able to use it ever. And if you're not facing magic-wielding enemies, you never get to use it. And even if you are facing those magic-wielding enemies, there are so many different ways that you can effectively prevent them, or they can prevent you from getting benefits from all of these things. So, yeah, overall, it's a very passive ability feat. because you have to hope that the enemy is going to do the things that allow you to do something, and that's just not very fun. The other thing about this is this doesn't really give you any new abilities. All it does is it makes the enemy's abilities slightly less effective. So as far as feats go, this isn't a buff to your character. This is a slight debuff to enemies that you face. And so everything about the 5.0 version of the Mage Slayer is just underwhelming, because it doesn't make your character better. It makes bad guys worse, but only if they do very specific things. Otherwise, they're completely ineffective. And it still requires you to get right up next to them, which is not a common thing to deal with. For spellcasters, they're smart enough to know, hey, I can sling fireballs up to 120 feet away. Maybe I'll stay outside of melee range. So the new version, which again is better, it's still not good. So the 5.5 version of the Mage Slayer. First of all, no flavor, because they don't add flavor in 5.5. Again, the 5.0, you have practiced techniques useful in melee combat against spellcasters, gaining the following benefits. 5.5, you gain the following benefits. General feat, prereq, level 4+. Not that useful. You get an ability score increase. You can increase either strength or dex by 1, which means that, and this is all 5.5 feats, all 5.5 general feats give you a bonus to one of your ability scores. So by default, that makes them more useful than the old feats that didn't give you that. Now, there were quite a few feats in 5.0 that did give you ability score increases, but that generally is because the feat itself just did less. I used to call them half feats, because half of the feat was you got an ability score improvement, the other half was whatever the feat did. Now all feats are half feats, so they tend to be a little more useful. So ability score increase, that in and of itself is useful. Concentration breaker. When you damage a creature that's concentrating, it has disadvantage on the saving throw it makes to maintain concentration. Again, useful ability, but still reliant on the enemy to actually be used, and it's theoretically useful. In practice, it really isn't. Unless you're doing really high damaging attacks, the disadvantage is not going to make a massive difference, because they generally are already going to have a 75 to like 80 or 90% chance of making their save, depending on what their concentration bonus is going to be. So again, it sounds useful, but it really isn't. And then Guarded Mind is the other one. If you fail an intelligence, wisdom, or charisma saving throw, you can cause yourself to succeed instead. And once you use it, you can't use it again to finish a short or long rest. This is another one that just isn't very useful. First of all, spell saves that include intelligence, wisdom, or charisma are significantly more rare than spell saves against either Constitution or the one that's always there, Dexterity. The most damaging attacks from most spellcasters are going to be Dexterity or Constitution saves. This doesn't help any of those. And it's a one and done thing. Excuse me. It's a one and done ability. Now, it's a one and done on a short rest, so it's not quite as bad as a long rest thing, but it's also still relying on the enemy to do something to allow you to use your feat. And that's never fun. If a feat is only useful if the enemy does something to you, then it's really not going to be that useful. And these are very, very specific situations. Like there's another feat, it's one of my favorite, called Defensive Duelist. And the 5.5 version of it is significantly better than the 5.0 version. The 5.0 version was still useful. For Defensive Duelist, the 5.0 version, if you're wielding a finesse weapon with which you are proficient and another creature hits you with a melee attack, You can use your reaction to add your proficiency bonus to your AC for the attack, potentially causing the attack to miss you. Unlike the stuff for the Mage Slayer, getting hit by a melee attack is an extremely common thing, and there are a ton of different ways that might happen. So that in and of itself is useful. The new version, first of all, gives you to increase your dex, and instead of it just using your reaction to have it happen once, the bonus to your AC persists until the start of your next turn. So you can basically, as long as someone tries to hit you with a melee attack, you can increase your AC by up to 6 points for until your next turn. That's a massive, massive deal. And again, as much as it does rely on the enemy doing something, this is something that every non-caster enemy is going to be doing to you if you're interacting with them. And the thing with Defensive Duelist is it's normally going to be used by players that are going to be in melee combat. And so the likelihood of you getting into melee combat with someone and they not making a melee attack against you is exceedingly low. Whereas with the Mage Slayer, the likelihood of them casting a spell while you're within 5 feet is kind of dependent on the DM, and 2 of the 3 abilities require you, in the 5.0 version, 2 of the 3 abilities require you to be within 5 feet of them. It is against their nature to cast spells when enemies are within 5 feet of them. It's always much better for them to cast spells with enemies are like 100 feet away. So, yeah. So that's the only way to quote-unquote make a Mage Slayer officially in D&D 5th edition is through the use of this really bad passive adjacent feat. Again, there are other RPGs where I've seen kind of the idea of a Mage Slayer tossed around, and they tend to kind of follow this pattern of you have some sort of passive ability that makes it harder for you to get killed by a mage, but again, it's passive, and you might have something that makes mages have less useful abilities. Like I've seen Mage Slayers like in Dragon Age. Templar are technically Mage Slayers. And a lot of times their abilities are basically things like being able to take away buffs or having a really, really high spell resist or something like that. And again, that's interesting, but it's still just not that much fun. You know, if you're going to claim that you belong to some order that is specifically designed to fight wizards, then it should be more than, well, I've got extra thick skin and I can hit them. Well, why does that make you different from anyone else fighting a mage? Well, my skin is thicker, so it's harder for them to hurt me. Okay, I guess that's cool. And I can hit them. Well, I can hit them too. Yes, but when I hit them, it really hurts. But it's not really changing how you play the class. I would much rather see either a feat that actually gives you a new ability, or what I think would be even better is either an entire class based around it, or at least a subclass based around the idea of I am a Mage Slayer, and the things that you get, there should be some sort of either passive or active resistance deflection style thing against magic attacks, because one of the things that any Mage Slayer style character would need to be able to do is you have to get up to the mage. While you're getting up to the mage, they're going to be slinging spells at you. So yes, there should be some sort of defensive aspect to it to make you either a less viable target, where they will choose to attack someone else instead of the dude that's running directly at them, or make you a more difficult to hurt target, whether it's easier for them to miss, whether if they do hit, it does less damage, things like that. Now, at the same time, simply because an ability is defensive in nature in the idea that it protects you, does not mean that there can't be an offensive aspect to it. Having the ability to make a check or a save or something in your system that when a spell is cast against you, because you are a Mage Slayer, it's not just that, oh, it hurts me less, or oh, it's harder to hit me. If you can actually return some of that spell back to the mage, now you have something that to me makes a lot more sense for a Mage Slayer style character. Instead of just being, well, I'm really hard to kill with magic. Now it's, oh, you are more than welcome to attack me with magic, but I will guarantee you, you will feel it when you do. That, in and of itself, is a cool ability. First of all, it's an active aspect. You know, the fact that you get to actually attack them, and whether the attack itself is, well, we turn the spell back against you, or what I think would probably be a little bit easier to balance, blocking a spell of some sort gives you the ability to retaliate in a similar manner to something like Hellish Rebuke, or something like that, where by absorbing some of the attack you can redirect it, but that redirection is an active choice from you as opposed to just a passive kind of knockback or feedback of effect. I think that makes for an incredibly more interesting Mage as a Slayer, someone that can literally reflect back parts of spells or full spells. And if you make that kind of the defining feature of this as a subclass, you can upgrade it as you go along to add additional effects or just have different choices. Like your base version of it does damage. And it can be based on the level of the spell. If you're using Vancian magic, it could be based on the number of dice used for the damage roll. It could be based on just the overall damage that you would have taken. You do a percentage of it. All of those things are worthwhile. But then as you level up, you start getting other things. Like maybe one of the abilities you have is a spell seal, where if they use a spell against you, you can seal that spell so that they can't use that spell again until a certain amount of time passes. Perhaps it's your own version of concentration, where if they want to be able to use that spell again, they have to hit you or cause you to lose concentration in some way. So that actually feeds into that idea of your attacking the Mage Slayer is not in their best interest, because the Mage Slayer can reflect their spells back. But then, now that the Mage Slayer has been able to seal that particular spell that's very useful to them, well, now they have a high incentive of attacking the Mage Slayer, because if they can get around those defenses, well, then they get access to their spell back. So, yeah. And then other things, other things that you can do when you reflect or deflect spells. Maybe as you get it upgraded, you're able to deflect it to multiple targets, or you're able to deflect it to a different target. So not only can you attack the mage, but you can attack the mage's allies, because maybe there is an ally that is giving the mage a shield, or is healing the mage, or doing things that make it more difficult. Having the ability to kind of redirect the spell or redirect some of the damage to a different target would be an interesting way to kind of upgrade that. And then there's always the kind of classic things of being able to knock them prone or force movement or things like that. Your more standard debuff style things, all being based on this magic deflection. Now, it still runs into the problem that we talked about before, which is that idea of it still requires the spellcasting character to choose to cast spells that include the Mage Slayer. So in addition to a defensive style of ability that's still very useful but is dependent on the Mage Slayer, there should be an offensive style ability. If you play Dragon Age Inquisitions, one of the specialties you can get for a warrior is you can become a Templar. And again, Templar are built to fight mages. Their actual job is the Templar live in the mage towers, or the mage circles, which is where all the mages go, and they get watched over by their effectively Templar guards. Their entire purpose is if somebody starts to become an abomination, someone starts playing with magic that they shouldn't, Templar's job is to go and kill them. And so they do have abilities, like they have an ability called Spell Purge, which basically any enchantments on a character, they get to just go, no you don't, zoop, all of them are gone. Which in Dragon Age makes a lot of sense, because a lot of playing a spellcasting character involves doing things like putting up barriers and doing other casting other spells on yourself that just give you more stuff. So a Spell Purge style of ability makes perfect sense, but one of the ways that you can upgrade it is the ability for the Spell Purge to actually do damage as well, especially if it actually cancels something. So an ability like that on a Mage Slayer style character, where you can either target enemies that, again, if we're using Vancian magic, if this is a D&D 5th edition character, if they have spell slots of any level, it allows you to attack them. Or if we're doing another system, if they have a limited resource that allows them to cast spells, whether it's magic points or whatever, it allows you to use this particular ability and maybe burn spell slots, burn magic points, deal damage, maybe even be able to cast one of their spells against them or something like that. Just something that's significantly more active but still geared towards magic users. And if you make them general enough, you don't have to run into the problem of, well, the DM's not throwing any more spellcasters at me, so my subclass abilities are useless. Being able to, like, if you're fighting a dragon, dragons can be very magical, but a lot of times they use things like breath attacks in that. So having things like, well, instead of your deflect ability being specifically based on if they cast a spell, what if it's just elemental damage? If it's one of these damage types, you can activate it, which happens to be the vast majority of attack spells use those, but it also means things like dragons will still be something that you can deflect and use all of your cool, or at least some of your cool abilities on. To me, that makes a significantly more interesting character. Having a defensive ability and then having some kind of offensive ability geared towards magic users. And then you can start adding in different things. Like, again, one of the biggest problems with fighting a magic user is magic users generally tend to have a lot of different ways to keep themselves away from enemies. They have teleportation spells, they have fly spells, things like that. So having a movement-based ability where you can teleport directly to a magic user, or you can drag a magic user towards you, something that allows you to close the distance in some way, would again be a technique that Mage Slayers would need to develop. From a lore-based perspective, a Mage Slayer would need to develop a way to get close enough to a spellcaster to be able to attack them. So either a gap closer of some kind where you can either pull them or you can go to them, or just something that makes it so the magic user doesn't stop you from getting to them. Maybe being able to make yourself invisible to a particular character until you attack them. which was a thing that they had in D&D 4th edition. There were quite a few different abilities where you would basically gain, the Avenger had quite a few of them. You would basically, if you attacked and used a particular power, it would say you were counted as invisible to that creature until this condition. And those could be really, really fun because you could basically attack someone, like throw your sword at them or something, and they would just kind of forget that you exist for a little bit. They'd still be able to be a part of combat and do stuff, but they would just completely ignore you. So you can get close enough to do bad stuff. So that in and of itself is a really, really simple, and again, really easy to balance ability, because one of the easiest ways to balance it is you limit how many people can be affected by it and why they are affected. Again, you can put something in an ability like that that says if you are fighting a character that has the ability to cast spells or has the ability to inflict elemental damage of some sort, you can use this ability to cloak them from your mind. And again, come up with a pretty interesting Mage Slayer style character. So, yeah, like I said, I was thinking about Fenris and Templars and all that stuff, and I just thought I really haven't seen a Mage Slayer style character that I've ever gone, oh man, I want to create and I want to play a character like this. And I think it's a shame because, again, from a lore perspective, it's a really cool ability, or it's a really cool archetype that would need to exist in a world where magic is so common place. And I just haven't seen a whole lot of times where that's a thing. So, interested to hear from you guys. Do you guys have an idea for abilities or skills that would make sense for a character who's kind of devoted their combat training to fighting against magic users? What kind of things could you see them, what kind of skills and stuff like that could you see them having? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that's all for me today. I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.